Alright, let's take the cylinder heads off from this 2017 Subaru Forester with a dual overhead cam 2.5 liter. I made you guys this sweet little clamp mount right here to hold the phone so you'll have a more stable image. It swivels, it bends, maybe we can get some better angles on what I'm actually doing. The first thing I'm going to do is take this 10mm bolt out of this plastic guard. I'm assuming is to keep your hand out of the belt. Once that's out of there, this end just sort of pulls straight up and pops out of there with one of these guys right there. Now I'm going to get after this little cover over here, see if I can swivel as nicely as I was thinking I could. That's not so bad. I'm going to take out these two little push rivets right there. And you just pry these up with a screwdriver. Right there. Those are out of the way. Get this guy. Slides right out of there. Next is this reservoir. Let's try to get a close-up of how that comes out. Right over here on the side of the reservoir is this little clip right here. You just push in on that and pull outward on the reservoir, and she's free. Unhook your hose, and that reservoir pulls straight up and out. Next is the top radiator hose. This is pretty straightforward. Just take the clamps off both ends and pull the hose out. This should have pinch clamps on both sides, but it doesn't, and it's an aftermarket hose. That might be a sign of what happened to the cylinder heads. Somebody might have replaced that hose for whatever reason, got an air pocket in it, overheated the engine, and warped the heads. I still can't get a great angle of me unplugging these cooling fans, but there's a little button right here on the back side, and you should use two hands for this because it hurts. And she just pops out like that. We got the same thing over on the other side, only this one's sort of tucked into a little pocket on the side of the cooling fan. But once you pull it out of that pocket, it's the same thing. There's a little button on the back side, and two hands. Pull that out like that. Cooling fan. Oops, wrong gear. That out of there. Same thing over here. Same thing over here. And here. Cooling fans are free, and those pull straight up and out. No problem. Now we're on to the belt tensioner. Get that out of there. Now I'm going to remove this air cleaner. I have to remove that 10mm nut right there, and I want to remove the 10mm bolt just down there. I also have to pull that wire snap off from the side for the mass airflow sensor. While I'm looking at it, I'll take this clamp off from the intake right here so that that's loose. Mass airflow sensor. Now over here on the other side of the intake, if you look down in here, there's a little hose right there. We need to get that out of there. And that's just one of these pinch clamps right here. We'll just work it back and pull the hose off. Yay! Once all that stuff is out of there, you can work your intake off, and it should just pop out on this side. And she's out. Now we'll get the intake off, and we're going to start by removing these two little metal shields. There's a 10mm bolt there and a 10mm bolt there. There's the same thing on the other side, but it's harder to see, so I chose this side to show you. With those little bolts out, you just pull straight out on this shield and out it comes, no problem. Underneath of those metal shields are these fuel lines right here for the fuel rails, if that's what you want to call them. Just push in on these guys and shove them back, and they'll pop out like such. Pull it out on the back side, make sure it's all the way out, and then just give it a lift. And these are free. To sort of hurry this around, I'm just going to show you everything I'm about to unplug and then unplug it. There's another fuel rail over on the other side. There's this fuel line here, the hose underneath of it which just has a pinch clamp. There's this coolant line right here which just has a pinch clamp, and one right there as well that all have to be unhooked. Then we have wires. There's this wire right here for the runner I have to unplug. Two injector wires down here. This wire anchor right here, this throttle body, and this sensor, I think that's an absolute pressure sensor right there. The plug-in for the passenger side intake runner as well. This is going to be hard to show you, but it's worth it if I can get a good angle. With these coils, this little wire thing right here just gets pushed in. Like that right there. And then if you can get behind it with something and just slide it out, that's how you unplug those. That's the best angle I can give you. And you've got to do that with all of these coil wires. Also nearly impossible to get an image of is the anchor that holds those lines onto the back of the head. you need a tool like this that you can get behind it, and it's right there where that little wrap is, and you just work it out like that. That one broke. That happens a lot. Putting that back together will probably involve anchoring that wire with a zip tie, and we have to do all of the same things to the driver's side head as well. The driver's side's identical with the same coil wires and the same anchor for the wiring harness on the back side of the valve cover. Only instead of pulling an air cleaner out of the way, we are pulling a battery out of the way. I was hoping I could just loosen this nut with this ancient tool called a standard box end, and then when it got to a certain point, spin it off with my fingers. But it does take a bit more force than I wanted. Either way, this nut comes off, that nut comes off, and all this stuff just falls out of there. Okay, now let's take out the intake bolt. Some of you are probably wondering why we had to unplug the coils to get the intake off. It's actually because these wires are stretched so tightly over the intake runners, you can't move them out of the way to pull the intake off. But there's 3 bolts, one right back there, one right there, and one right there on each side. So let me get you into there, and I'll pop those out of there. These aren't really in all that tight, but pop loose. Well, I guess you don't need to watch me turn bolts. That's it. And of course, now that I've taken all of those bolts out, I realize I forgot to take the bolts out of the EGR tube right back here. It's the bottom line you want to unhook, and it's these 2 10mm bolts on either side of the line that you got to get out of there. It looks like everything's loose, but I see an anchor right down in there that looks like that needs to come out before I can start lifting on this intake. Something like that. Well, geez, guys, I guess I also forgot to unplug the evaporator purge solenoid. That's this guy back here. You just push in on these 2 little tabs on the back of this blue wire and work this off gently. But that's why you got to be gentle when you're pulling the intake off from this vehicle. You can't memorize every single vehicle. You will forget stuff. You won't be able to memorize everything. And if you go pulling on that thing super hard, eventually you're going to break something you forgot to unhook. Now I think we're ready to get this thing off from here. Again, be gentle when you're pulling up on it. If it feels like something's holding it, look. And yeah, she's out of there. Look at that. Good. We'll set this someplace. Now we got to take this little bracket off the front right here that's attached to the AC pump and the alternator. First, we need to unanchor this wire here. Let me show you something. With my handy dandy mount, I got you an angle of the bottom of this thing. And if you look at these clips right here on each side, if you push in on them, you don't have to just pry up and break your clips. And it's out of there. Pull you out of that. Now that's out of there. There's just a 10mm bolt here and a 10mm bolt right there. Now I'm going to remove the alternator. That's this 12mm right here and this 12mm right here. Now we're after this air conditioning pump. We need to unplug this wire, which is this little gray tab. You just push down on it. Of course, I can't get you any decent lighting. And that's unplugged. This wire was supposed to be anchored there, but it wasn't. And we've got to get to that bolt down there that's behind the tensioner right there. Now you can't just remove the tensioner because this entire alternator bracket is part of the tensioner, and the last bolt to remove that alternator bracket is behind this pulley. So what we have to do is we get ourselves a small screwdriver, and this is a 14mm, and just reefer back like that. There's this little hole right there, and that'll lock everything in place so we can get to this bolt right there and this bolt right there. I don't know if you can see any of that. What we're after are those 2 right there. Now from the top, we got that bolt right there to take out and that bolt right there to take out. Under the AC clutch, there's also that bolt right there. No need to disconnect any of the AC lines. You can just flop the pump over like that and leave it there. Now this is where this video ends. I'm trying to make videos that show people how to fix their cars, not just show that I know how to take things apart and put them back together. So there will be a little bit more detail with the videos on this car specifically, because a lot of people had asked for more detail with this car specifically. I will get back to doing more fun stuff like explanation videos eventually. There won't be any more videos on this car tonight, April 17th, because honestly I got a late start. I started at like 4, and recording makes an hour worth of work take like 3 hours. So it's 7 o'clock, I'm going home. I'll see you tomorrow.